The voice that shook the world. Martin Luther King Jr. was not just a man with a dream. He was a radical architect of social change who transformed the moral landscape of the 20th century. Born in 1929 into the segregated south of Atlanta, Georgia, King was a Baptist minister who rose to become the preeminent leader of the American civil rights movement. He is best known for his philosophy of nonviolent resistance, a strategy he used to dismantle the systemic Jim Crow laws that treated black Americans as second-class citizens. Whether he was sitting in a Birmingham jail cell or standing before hundreds of thousands at the Lincoln Memorial, King used the power of words to turn local struggles into a global movement for human dignity. At a glance, his credentials were as diverse as his impact. He was a Nobel Peace Prize laureate, a Ph.D. from Boston University, and even a winner of a posthumous Grammy. His mission was to achieve legal equality and economic justice for all people, and his legacy catalyzing the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965 fundamentally changed the legal fabric of the United States. Chapter 1. The Weight of the Name. The story of the man we know as Martin Luther King Jr. actually begins with a different name and a trip across the Atlantic. In 1934, a young Michael King Jr. was just 5 years old when his father returned from a trip to Germany. Michael King Sr. had been so moved by the courage of the Protestant reformer Martin Luther that he decided to rename himself and his son on the spot. From that moment, a destiny was forged. Growing up in the segregated South, Martin wasn't always the polished icon we see on stamps. He was a brilliant, questioning student who actually felt embarrassed by the emotionalism of the traditional church. But the pull of justice was stronger. At just 26 years old, he was thrust into the leadership of the Montgomery bus boycott. This period was a baptism by fire. While his family was inside, his house was bombed by segregationists. A massive, angry crowd gathered on his lawn, ready for a bloody retaliation. He stood on his porch and told the crowd to put their weapons away, teaching the world that nonviolence is the ultimate form of soul force. He proved that you don't need a fist to break a system of hate. Chapter 2. The Ad-libbed Revolution. By the early 1960s, Martin had become the most famous voice in America, but he was also a master strategist. He wasn't just a dreamer. He was a disruptor. When he was locked in a Birmingham jail cell in 1963, he didn't stop working. He wrote one of the most important documents in history on scraps of toilet paper and newspaper margins because he understood that wait almost always meant never. The peak of this era was the March on Washington. Most people think that I Have a Dream speech was a meticulously planned masterpiece, but the most famous part of it wasn't even in his notes. As he stood before 250,000 people, the gospel singer Mahalia Jackson shouted from the crowd, "Tell them about the dream, Martin." In an incredible moment of brilliance, he set his prepared script aside and ad-libbed the closing that would change history. What made Martin truly special was how he saw the future. He was a massive fan of Star Trek because it showed a world where race didn't matter. He even convinced actress Nichelle Nichols not to quit her role as LT Uhura, telling her she was showing the world what equality looked like. Chapter 3. The Radical Prophet. In his final years, Martin became a far more radical figure than history books often let on. He began to look beyond bus seats, turning his attention to the triple evils of racism, poverty, and war. He realized that it didn't matter if a man had the right to sit at a lunch counter if he didn't have the money to buy a hamburger. This shift made him dangerous to the establishment. He was hounded by the FBI and constantly under the shadow of death. The end came in Memphis in 1968, the night before he was killed. He gave a haunting speech where he seemed to acknowledge his own coming death, telling the crowd he had seen the promised land, but might not get there with them. While his life was tragically cut short at the age of 39, his voice remains the gold standard for courage. He left behind a reminder that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. He didn't just give a speech. He gave a mirror to a nation and asked it to finally look at itself. Now the podcast will continue 8 interesting facts about Martin Luther King. 1. The I Have a Dream speech was largely ad-libbed. While the speech is iconic today, the dream portion wasn't in the original draft. Mid-speech, gospel singer Mahalia Jackson shouted, "Tell them about the dream, Martin." King pivoted from his notes and delivered the most famous extemporaneous closing in history. 2. He survived a near-fatal assassination attempt a decade before 1968. In 1958, while signing books in Harlem, King was stabbed in the chest with a letter opener by a woman named Isola Ware Curry. The blade was so close to his aorta that his doctor told him if he had merely sneezed, he would have died. 3. Martin wasn't his birth name. He was actually born Michael King Jr. in 1934. His father, Michael King Sr., traveled to Germany and became so inspired by the Protestant reformer Martin Luther that he changed both his own name and his 5-year-old son's name legally. 4. He is the youngest male Nobel Peace Prize winner. In 1964, just 35 years old, King became the youngest man to receive the Nobel Peace Prize. He donated every cent of the $54,123 prize, money a massive sum at the time, to the civil rights movement. 5. King was a massive Star Trek fan. King actually convinced actress Nicole Nichols, who played Uhura, not to quit the show. He told her she couldn't leave because she was portraying a black character with dignity and professionalism in a future where race didn't define a person's worth. The first of its kind on TV. 6. He won a Grammy Award. Though known for his voice in pulpits, King won a posthumous Grammy for Best Spoken Word Recording in 1971. The award was for his speech, "Why I Oppose the War in Vietnam." 7. The King family had to pay the hospital bill for Julia Roberts' birth. King and his wife, Coretta, were friends with Julia Roberts' parents, who ran a theater school in Atlanta. When Julia was born and her parents couldn't afford the hospital bill, the Kings paid it in full as a thank you for the Roberts family welcoming their children into their acting school. 8. He spent his wedding night in a funeral home. Because of Jim Crow laws, many hotels in the South were segregated and wouldn't serve black couples. On their wedding night in 1953, the Kings stayed at a black-owned funeral home that offered guest rooms, the only place available to them that night. That concludes our deep dive into the life and the lesser-known legacy of Martin Luther King Jr. We hope these stories have given you a new perspective on the man who moved a nation with nothing more than his voice and his conviction. If you want to revisit any part of this story or share it with others, you can find the complete series and our special facts segment as a playlist on our YouTube channel, History of Leaders 365. Don't forget to subscribe to stay updated on the lives of the giants who shaped our world. Thank you for listening. Keep the dream alive, and we'll see you in the next episode.